Wasn't that beautiful? I think it's very fitting that today's sermon is about godly women in the Bible. Because I don't know about you, but we have seen a lot of women today show their talents and how they have been allowed to be used by God. Of course, Emma and Helena, thank you for that special item. Gosha for the children's story, and of course the singers and the worship team. Thank you all for being a part of, it's been a really great service so far, hasn't it, church? We have a few people who are away at Belgrave for a convention there, and so we want to extend blessings to them as they worship. But welcome to all those who have come today. All those here at church and also those who are joining us online. It is always a pleasure to be able to share the pulpit with you all. And we are continuing the series that we've been running over the last few weeks called Finding Jesus in the Old Testament. And as you can see, the title is In Her Story, Women Who Pointed to Christ. Now, before I actually get into the sermon portion, and talking about women who have achieved a lot, there is a person here who has finished her studies, specifically in general nursing, and is starting her, official job next week at Box Hill Hospital. And so because we are a family here and we need to share in these accolades, I want you all, when you see Zoe Buse, to make her feel very, very uncomfortable, come all up together and congratulate her for such an amazing job that she's done and a very exciting career ahead. Well done. And I'm thinking of all those who are also starting uni next week. I know uni starts for a lot of you, so good luck. It is a really crazy time, and hopefully you'll be able to do the best that you can. Now, I want to just give you a heads up as to where we're up to. I'm looking around the church and I see some people who may have not been a part of the series that we've been running. So just to catch you up, we are in part 4, and so what have we been doing the last few weeks? The first week we looked at Jesus physically appearing in the Old Testament, something that confuses and surprises a lot of people. We actually see Jesus there in the Old Testament, hidden in plain sight. Pastor Daniel then carried on that, talking about the lineage and the promise from the beginning, the first prophecy of the Messiah coming and seeing that through the lineage of the Old Testament. Last week, I talked about, is that last week? Yes. Last week, I talked about the angelophanies or the Christophanies, and looking more closely into some of the times where the angels have come and appeared, and asking the question, is that an angel or is that the Messiah? Today, we are moving away from the physical appearances of Christ and looking at things we call typology. Typology is when you see a character or a poem or a motif or something in the Bible and it points towards something greater. And today, we're going to be doing that with the women in the Bible, specifically the women in the Old Testament. Now, by the way, how many courageous, godly, amazing women are there in the Bible? Can anyone give me a number? Is there a lot? I could do a 20, 30-part series on this alone. So to be able to just put it all in one sermon is going to be really tough for me. In fact, the hardest thing about this topic, and I'm just going to be really, really frank and honest with you all, is before I ever do a sermon, I always do a bit of a check around town to see what other churches are talking about with the topic that I'm about to present. And I don't know whether you'll be surprised or not, but when I Googled women in the Bible, and just to see what preachers and pastors and people on YouTube are talking about, do you know what topics kept coming up? What they can and can't do. Are women supposed to wear head coverings? Are they supposed to preach? Are they meant to be pastors? Are they meant to talk in church? Here's the thing, if we followed let's say the rule that women could not talk in church, we would have a very quick service. So it's so interesting to get an insight into, what women feel when it comes to some of these restrictions and rules and almost this pressure that's upon you as Christian women living in 2026, by the way, and seeing that this pressure was here. I guess me saying that I kind of know what you feel is like maybe me saying, look, I've got a tummy ache, so I know what it feels like to give birth. I get it. I understand that I have no idea. But I am feeling the pressure that you feel. But it's so interesting to see that pressure of rules and what you can and can't do and being put in a box. It hasn't changed in 4,000 years. In fact, when you read the Old Testament specifically, you are very, very quickly understanding that the culture that they lived in was very different than ours. There were a lot of things that women could and couldn't do, and it was very much a patriarchal system that they were in. Women couldn't speak with authority. They couldn't make decisions on their own. It even got so bad that if you were in a court of law and you had a man and a woman who were both witnesses to an event, the woman's account of what happened was less than the man's. And so when you have this culture and you understand the type of world that we're living in, I want to invite you all, as we jump into the Old Testament, to put on the cultural lenses and to maybe not see what we're reading through 2026. Maybe try and understand the culture that they were in and some of the decisions that they made, because we're going to be looking at a few of those decisions together. There were a lot of women with great strength, courage, and faithfulness, sometimes even more so than many men. And it's interesting to see that this disconnect of, I guess, non-equality of men and women being treated differently was not the purpose of creation. Before sin came into the world, we had a picture of what men and women were supposed to do and how they were supposed to interact. And we see very clearly God's plan. Genesis 1, verse 27 says, "So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him," who? Male and female, he created them. Who was created in the image of God? Tell me. Male and female. Do you know what? Even that verse and statement is controversial. Did you know that? Even saying that nowadays in this world is controversial. But we see men and women both created in his image, which means that both are required to understand Christ and God's image completely. You know, we've been talking about lately in the last few weeks that if you just focus on the New Testament's account of Christ and you don't focus on the Old Testament, you've only got half of God. Did you know that if you only focus on men and what they do in the Bible and who they are and how they reflect God, you've only got half of the image of God? It's so interesting to see some of the things that women bring to the table, and it is so awesome to see. And so I can even go so further in saying that husbands and wives, who here has ever said to their partner or to their spouse, "You complete me"? Anyone said that? As a romantic little saying? Of course, in the 90s, we had those movies and we say, "You complete me, you make me whole." Do you know that's not biblical? Did you know that your husband or your wife or your spouse or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, they're not supposed to complete you? The idea of creation is that man and woman together bring a complete image of God. They are not meant to complete each other. And so when we have this idea that we together, men and women, are supposed to reflect God, then it brings into account how important women are in this story. In fact, the first time God reveals his character to the world, very interestingly, after the Israelites had crossed the Red Sea, had worshipped the golden calf, God reveals himself in a saying in Exodus 34, verse 6. Let's have a read of this, actually. Let's open our Bibles together. Exodus 34, verse 6. I've got it up on the screen for you, but always much better to have your own Bibles. Exodus 34, verse 6, and it says this: the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering and abundant in goodness and truth. This is the first time that we have God revealing himself in a descriptive nature. And seeing that he represents himself, it's so interesting that the first adjective, the first describing word that he uses, is a word in Hebrew called racham. I want you all to say that with me. Can you say racham? No, I need the ha. Racham. Oh, that's all right. That's close enough. Racham literally means a mother's womb. The first word that God uses to describe his nature and himself, he uses a feminine word. He basically calls himself a merciful mother. God wanted to show the world that he was compassionate, that he was merciful, that he was gracious. And so this statement may also be quite controversial nowadays, but men and women are equal in value, but they are different in role. Do you understand that? Men and women are equal in value, but they are different in role. Now, in this day and age, when we talk about men and women and the differences, they kind of get it wrong. We get the men and women are equal part really well. In fact, I think in 2026, we're getting quite close to that. But we don't understand that they're also different in role. We've kind of put that together. Whereas in ancient times, they had it completely the opposite. They did not see men and women as equal in value, but they understood that they were different in role. And we will always get this mixed up until God comes back, because this is the evil world that we live in. We are equal in value, but different in role. And so this mercy, this compassion, I believe God is mentioning here, this feminine half of God, it is no surprise that it is on full display in the women that are shown in the Old Testament. And so, you probably can't see that from there. No, you wouldn't have a chance to see that. That's the genealogy of Jesus. If you want to have a look at it, go to the book of Matthew, first chapter. You'll get an idea of what the genealogy is. But here's the thing. Genealogies are great because you can see all these great things. You can see the types of things that your ancestors got up to. Anyone here done the Ancestry.com DNA test? A few? Any surprises that you found in your ancestry? No surprises? That's no fun. I want to tell you one thing that I found in mine. I have a Samoan lineage back on my dad's side, and he's told me, when he was alive, of course, and my grandmother, that if a certain amount of people dropped off, I'd be one of the chiefs in Samoa. So I'm just letting you know, if I just disappear, you know what's happened. But it's interesting because you see in your ancestry a lineage, and you might see some surprises. Maybe some things are not as perfect as you once thought. Maybe something that's popped in there, maybe an uncle or an auntie or a great-grandmother has done something that maybe isn't the best. But something that's interesting here about Jesus' genealogy is that 5 women are mentioned in the lineage. Now that is super weird, because when it comes to this patriarchal, men-focused Old Testament mentality and culture, you would not see a woman in a genealogy because it passes through the man. It would just be unheard of. But we get 5 in the lineage. It's almost, and I want you just to understand the gravity of how weird this is, it's almost pretend you are a HR manager for a company and someone gives you a resume, and on that resume is the picture of the person, the strengths, the experience, where they've come from, but then there's this huge section that says weaknesses. And it's not the typical weakness that people just say, oh, my weakness is that I work too hard. That kind of cop-out weakness. No, this person has put in there that they have cheated on their girlfriend 3 or 4 times. They come from a broken home, they're lazy, and they tend to have long toilet breaks. Now, would you hire that person? I probably would. It's really good to have an employee who's honest, because I guarantee you every other application have their own skeletons in their closets. At least they know them now. But see how weird that would be, how out of the norm it would be, and that's exactly what we see here in the genealogy. We have 5 women who just come out of nowhere, and I believe, after doing my research, I believe there is a biblical and godly reason for it. These women are amazing people. And so we're not going to focus on the men, we're going to focus on the women today, and we want to get a fuller image of God from the woman and the feminine perspective. Now, before we go into the 5 women, in fact, here's a little statement for you. The gospel didn't begin at the cross, it's written in the genealogy. And I want you just to remember that as we go through the rest of the message today. But I want to do a bit of a quiz. Who are the 5 women in the genealogy? I want to see if you guys know. So, I want you to shout out the names. Maritza, don't say any names. Rahab? Sorry? Eve? Nope. Ruth? Tamar? Oh, Deborah? Mary? There's one more. Oh, no one's got this one. I think David. Bathsheba. Oh, I told you not to say anything, Maritza. Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, Mary, and Tamar. Now, why? Why those 5 women? Well, we're going to have a little quick overview of these 5 amazing women. And we do not have enough time to look at all 5. I'm going to be focusing in on one of them today. Again, I told you I could do a full series on this. But before we zoom into one of the ladies, I want to show you a few things that connect all 5 of them. Kind of add to the meaning of why they've been included into this genealogy. So, number 1. They all came from scandal and shame. Commonality from all of these stories. Mary had a baby out of wedlock. Bathsheba had the shame of David's adultery. Rahab was a prostitute. You know, we could go through all of them and see the shame and the scandal that they have. What's the next one? They were all courageous risk takers. If you know the stories of any 5 of them, you'll understand the courage that it took for them to step out in faith. They were all outsiders. 3 of them weren't even Jewish, and one of them is debatable. We're not really sure where Bathsheba comes from, whether or not she was a Jew or not. But we know that 3 were definitely not Jewish. They all chose faith over reputation. They all made way for great descendants, as we will find out. And they all realized that they needed help that wasn't from their own strength. Now, I want you to notice something. All of those characteristics are characteristics of Christ. He has the same story. He comes from scandal. He was courageous. He was an outsider. Whenever he would walk around, he was not like the Pharisees or the Jews. Even though he was Jewish by his nature, he would do things that were so different and so radical. He chose faith over reputation. Of course, when we talk about making way for great descendants, he was the father of the church, the head of the church. And he also realized that he needed help. Every morning he would go to his father and pray. Already, as an overview of these 5 women, we get a picture of Jesus, of God. Now, I don't believe all of these commonalities are exclusive just to women, maybe except the last one. I know that we as men don't do very well with asking for help. I get that. But when it comes to all of these types of things, I think that the majority of them come from the feminine side of God. And so when we look at this list and we understand how amazing God was in choosing these 5 women, we understand more about God and his mercy and his compassion and who we serve. That he can choose broken people. In fact, he intentionally chooses broken people to be a part of his lineage, to further his mission and his gospel. Now, talking about broken people, who do you think I'm going to focus on? One of the 5 women. I'm going to focus on the one that we don't know much about. Who do you think that is? Tamar. How many of you have heard the story about Tamar? Yeah, a few of you. But out of the 5 women, it's probably the least known story of the 5. And that's why I chose to focus on this one. Now, as a warning, as a precaution, I just want to let you know we're going to be going into Genesis 38. It's a little bit R-rated. All right, the story gets a little bit juicy. There's parts of it where it may not be fully okay for the younger ones. And so consider this your warning. that we're going to be looking at some verses, but this is the reality of the situation. And I've chosen to read from the New King James Version. It's not as graphic as some of the other ones, but as you read in your translation, you might be surprised. I'm just letting you know that that's what we're going to be doing. So the story of Tamar is again in Genesis 38. And her name literally means a date from the palm tree. Now, the specific date that this is talking about is a specific date that is sweet, but is grown in harsh environments. And so even before we look at the story of Tamar, you always get a symbolism just from the name that we have someone who is sweet, that is growing up in a harsh environment. All right, hopefully you're in Genesis 38. I want you to have a look at the first verse. What's the first 3 words that starts the story off? Can someone read that out? What was that, Mark? At that time, or about that time, or around this time period. Okay, this is really important. I want you to go one back to Genesis 37, all the way down to the end of that chapter, the last verse. I want to know what time we're talking about here when we're talking about Tamar. It should be Genesis 37, verse 36. Can someone just read it in your mind and tell me where we are in the story? Joseph. And more specifically, Joseph has been sold into slavery to Egypt. So that's where we are. The chapter before is basically all the brothers deciding that they weren't going to kill Joseph, they were going to frame him, and they were going to pretend that he had been killed, but of course they would sell him to the traders in Egypt. Now, very quickly go to Genesis 39, verse 1. Because the whole story of Tamar is just Genesis 38. Tell me what verse 1 says. What are the first words? When Joseph was taken to Egypt by the traders. What's going on? It seems like this chapter has interrupted the narrative flow of what we're reading. You could have easily taken Genesis 38 out of the story and it would flow perfectly, one after the other. So why on earth, again, I want you just to put the detective hat on. Why on earth are these abnormalities happening in the Bible? Why the 5 women in the genealogies? Why the random Genesis 38 that's planted in the middle of the story about Joseph that focuses on Judah, that we'll find out soon? I want you to think about that as we read about Judah and about Tamar. And look, we'll just start and we'll just read and then we'll carry on. So Genesis 38, let's start in verse 6 and we'll read from verse 6 to 10. Then Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord killed him. That's pretty full on. And Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and marry her, and raise up an heir to your brother." But Onan knew that the heir would not be his, and it came to pass, when he went in to his brother's wife, that he emitted on the ground, lest he should give an heir to his brother. And the thing which he had did displeased the Lord, therefore he killed him also. Those are pretty uplifting verses, hey? What have we just stumbled into here? It's almost like we've just opened like a dramatic TV show, and we're seeing some of these crazy things that are happening in the Bible. Now, I want you to give you a bit of cultural context here. In the Israelite culture, if the husband died and left a widow and that husband had brothers, then it was the next brother's job to take on the widow, to look after the widow. Now, it was there for protection. There wasn't any other cultures that did it because they wanted to protect the women. But what happened here is that when the first brother got killed, the second one came along, and in their culture, if they had a baby together, that offspring would not be of the alive brother. It would technically class as the offspring of the dead brother. And so what would happen is that later down the track, if the father had died, let's say if Judah died, the inheritance would actually skip the second brother who's alive and go straight down to the inheritance of the son, considering that it was from the firstborn son, technically. So when we think about this, we understand the motives of the second brother. He didn't want to have a baby with her. He just wanted the fun. He just wanted to have this woman, but not have the responsibility or the consequences. And so God strikes both of these brothers down. And I want you just to notice at this point in time, Tamar has already lost 2 husbands who have mistreated her badly. It hasn't been great for her so far. And so she goes to Judah, who's the father. And the next brother in line wasn't quite ready. He was a little bit young. And so Judah said to Tamar, wait a little bit, give me some time, wait for him to grow up, and then I will give you my 3rd son so that he can marry you and protect you. But the Bible says that he said this as a lie. He was not intending to give the 3rd brother to Tamar. Now I'm putting into his context, you see that he's given 2 of his sons to this woman and they've both died. You can kind of understand why he was a bit apprehensive. What's she going to do to the 3rd one? And so when you look at this from the cultural perspective, you understand all of their intentions that's going on, but Judah lies to Tamar and mistreats her again. Now, I'm skipping a few things because there's a whole chapter that we can read and we can do that, but I'll just summarize it for us. Judah's wife dies, and Tamar finds out that he's coming to town for a bit of fun. He needs to let loose. And so Tamar clothes herself and pretends to be a harlot and tries to seduce Judah as he's coming in. And it works. Judah takes the bait, and they're trying to figure out the price, and Judah says, I've got a few goats. She looks behind him, literally the Bible says this, and she looks and she can't see any goats, and she says, where's the money? And so Judah and her keep debating, and suddenly they get to a conclusion, which is, I will have your signet, your cord, and your staff. Now, what on earth are those 3 things in the context of 2026? What does that even mean? There's a lot of symbolism behind those 3 items, but again, to translate into our culture, it basically was his passport, his driver's license, and his very, very valuable family heirloom that he traded for a night. Do you think that was a good decision? What do you think? No. A bit of a silly decision, right, for a night. And in fact, we read in the Bible that after he's had his thing and it's happened and his senses come back, he tries to look for the stuff that he's lost and he can't find it anymore, so he goes home. And then we get to verse 24. So I want you to skip all the way down to verse 24. I wanted the Bible to share this portion of the story. Genesis 38, verse 24 to 26. And it came to pass about 3 months after that Judah was told, saying, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has played the harlot. Furthermore, she is with child by harlotry. So Judah said, bring her out and let her be, what does the Bible say? Burned. Now, I want you just to understand the gravity of this. In that culture, if this had happened, there would be probably a stoning, so it would still be really bad culturally. But for Judah to be quick, to be the first one, to be the father-in-law of her, to be the first one saying, no, let's not stone her, let's burn her. You can see how evil Judah is at this point. You can see how bad and how much he's failing to be the protector of Tamar. And you can really feel Tamar here. When she was brought out, she sent to her father-in-law saying, by the man to whom these belong, I am with child. And she said, please determine whose these are, the signet and cord and staff. So Judah acknowledged them and said, she has been more righteous than I, because I did not give her to Shelah my son. And he never knew her again. Now I'm going to stop there with the story. You kind of get an idea of what's going on with Tamar. Was Tamar, here's my question for you. Was Tamar strong, courageous, and faithful in her story? I want to ask you. What do you think? Because it's a really messy story, isn't it? We sometimes don't know what to think about this. It's not so clear-cut. But when I read the story of Tamar, I see courage and strength and faith more than what I see in most other characters in the Bible. She would have felt so alone in the story. We are not told that she had any support. We're not told that she had a best friend or a family member that she could come close to in this time of need. And at this point, she did what she had to be able to secure her future. Even to the point of being killed for what she did, she risked her life on a promise she had only heard of. She wasn't guaranteed this was going to work, but she knew how important these items were to Judah and to the family. And now, having his son, she took a bold chance. But see, here's the amazing thing. So we're going to stop for a second from Genesis 38. I want you just to realize that this is coming from the lineage of Judah. Now, what does the Bible say about the tribe of Judah? Is it in a good or in a bad sense? Is the Bible positive about the tribe of Judah, or is it negative? What do we think? I want you to turn to Psalms 78. Psalms chapter 78. We're going to have a look because you've got context as to how evil and how despicable Judah is. Psalms 78, verses 67 to 69. I've got it here on the screen for you if you need it. This is talking about Jesus, where it says, "He rejected the tent of Joseph and did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved." One of the things that the Israelites were waiting for with the Messiah, in the New Testament especially, is they keep saying that he is coming from the tribe of Judah, the lion. That's what the tribe of Judah represents, the strong, prideful lion. And here in Psalm 78, it tells us that God specifically chose the tribe of Judah over, by the way, Joseph. Now, what's Joseph's story like? Is he an evil, despicable man? No. The story of Joseph is the complete opposite. The story of Joseph is probably one of my favorite stories of all time. It's one of those stories that you read and you go, wow, I can see Jesus in this story very much. But God chose this treacherous, evil man, Judah, to be a part of his lineage instead. And do you know why? Because of Tamar. It was all because of Tamar, and I'll show you how. The next time that we hear about Judah in the story, so you've read Genesis 38, you understand the stuff that he got up to when he was bad. The next time that we hear Judah speak up, it's in the courts in Egypt when he's speaking to his brother, Joseph. And you know what he says? He says, "Do not take my brother Benjamin, take my life instead." Do you see the change? Because in Genesis 37, right at the end of that story, before we get Genesis 38, he is a part of the group, the brothers, who sell Joseph into slavery, who does not protect his brother. And then in 38, we get the same thing where he does not protect his daughter-in-law. And this change of heart comes because of the strength of Tamar finally getting Judah to his senses and changing him because of her faith and her courage. We don't realize this. We don't give her credit for this because she was the quiet, courageous, faithful one. And yet she did all the work. And because of the courage of Tamar, that would mean that a woman later in the years called Ruth could meet a man called who? Boaz, who comes from the line of Tamar and Judah. Again, I want you to realize the gravity of this. If Tamar did not stand up and have the courage that she had, we would not have this story. We would not have this lineage. Sometimes we read these historic moments in time and we think, wow. I mean, look at Tamar. How could I ever be like her? How could I ever put my life in jeopardy with the faith that she showed? But what we don't realize when we read these Bible stories is that for them in the moment, it's just another Monday for them. Just another day. They didn't know it was a historic moment in history. Tamar had no clue that she was going to be part of the lineage of the Messiah coming down from all of history and have through her line Jesus Christ being born. No, for her, she just looked at what she was doing, wanted to survive, wanted to get through. She wanted to be able just to get through her life, what was in front of her. Sometimes we go through these pains and sufferings and struggles and loss, and we think, what is the purpose of this, Lord? Why did you take me through this path? Surely this is not you working in my life. You didn't mean for me to be over here. You didn't mean for this to happen to me. Surely you had a better plan for me, Lord. And we don't realize that sometimes in the pain and the struggle, God does his biggest miracles. And he has the biggest impact. He even chooses specifically the ones who are the most broken, the ones that have the worst history, the ones who in society don't seem like can do anything, and he chooses them because he wants to show his power through you, knowing that it's actually got nothing to do with you, but it's him. And that's what Tamar did. She stayed faithful, she did what she could, and she allowed God to use her. The gospel didn't begin at the cross. It's written into the genealogy. These stories of mercy and compassion and faithfulness and courage come before Jesus is even born on the earth, because these women were pointing towards something greater. These faithful women were an image of God before Jesus came on this earth to do what they had done. They all led to Christ. And so these stories show God's full image, these broken people that reflected who Christ was going to be. And Christ came and became a man and showed it to the world once again. I want to leave with you just one story to think about, and then I'll ask the worship team to come up and sing our last song, Who You Say I Am. I want you to imagine the story of Stephen and of Saul in the New Testament. Stephen is the first martyr of the Christian faith, called the Way back then. And he's standing in front of a court, he does this big speech, and then the Pharisees and all of the Jewish leaders come and they stone Stephen to death. But before he goes, can you imagine him looking into the crowd and seeing this one man there, standing and holding the coats of those who are throwing the stones? Just want you to imagine that. Now, I want you to imagine in heaven when Jesus comes back and collects us all. And we're all got the reunions, and you can see your family members, and you can see all of these people that you missed, and it's going to be such an amazing time. But I want you to focus on Stephen's face as he sees this man, Saul, who was a part of the crowd stoning him, in heaven, and everyone wants to talk to him. Can you just imagine that? And then he finds out the story about Saul turning into Paul and being this person who creates most of the New Testament for us and being one of the greatest apostles that ever lived. And you have to explain to Stephen how the heck that happened, because he was there at the first stoning, being a part of the mob that killed him. I want you to realize that that story is showing God's mercy and compassion and power. There is no one on this earth who has ever lived, and I include, by the way, Adolf Hitler, who was too far away from God's mercy and compassion. I want you to realize this, church family. If someone like Adolf Hitler, who was the most worst human piece of, and I will not say this right now, who had ever lived, who was a part of so many people who died, if he, before he passed, had genuinely given his heart to God and said, I am so sorry of what I have done, God's love would reach him. That would be the feeling that we would get if we saw someone like him in heaven, wouldn't it? But the thing is, we wouldn't feel all those negative emotions. We would look at him and we would praise the Lord. Do you know what Judah's name means? Praising the Lord. And so when we have these stories of brokenness, of sketchy histories, of questionable family lineage. And I look in the Bible, and then I look out to us at a church family, and we've all got our things. God not only can work through you, he chooses to work through you. He chooses to work through the broken and the shame and the ones who are struggling the most. And he looks at you and he says, you're not too far away from my love. Allow me to work through you today. I invite the worship team to come up as we sing Who You Say I Am.